What would you do if a 92-year-old woman stood in front of Judge Frank Caprio and said, "Your Honor, the parking ticket is fair. The lie behind it lasted 68 years." Drop a comment telling us your first reaction, because the next few minutes turned a routine courtroom morning into the kind of moment people never forget. At first, everyone thought this was just another parking case. Hit that subscribe button if you love stories where one small hearing suddenly reveals something much bigger. Nobody in that room knew they were about to watch a confession, a reckoning, and one act of mercy so powerful it would have lit up every phone screen in America. And if you believe the law should have a heart, like this video right now, because what Judge Caprio says later is the kind of line people carry for years. By the end of this story, a family burdened by silence would finally hear the truth, and a woman who looked tough as nails would break in a way that left the entire gallery silent. The morning it happened, Providence Municipal Court felt like it always did in late November. The radiators clicked, the fluorescent lights hummed, wet shoes squeaked against polished tile because a hard, cold rain had washed over downtown Rhode Island since dawn. The digital clock near the clerk's desk read 8:43 a.m. Case files were stacked in pale green folders. Coffee breathed through the room from paper cups clutched by people waiting for their names to be called. Judge Caprio had already seen a dozen parking tickets that morning. Meter violations, snow route issues, fire lane stops, the usual mix of excuses, shrugs, and polite bargaining. Court clerk Maria DeLuca, in a charcoal blazer and silver hoop earrings, called the next case in her practiced voice. Case number PVD-PK 2504192, Eleanor Mercer. There was a rustle near the back bench. A woman stood slowly but not weakly. She was tiny in height, maybe 5'1" on a generous day, but there was nothing small about the way she carried herself. Eleanor Mercer wore a camel-colored LL Bean wool coat buttoned to the throat, navy Easy Spirit walking shoes polished to a dull shine, and a pearl brooch pinned just below her left collarbone. Her white hair was combed into a soft helmet that hadn't surrendered to the weather. In one hand she held a brown leather handbag with a cracked strap. In the other, a smooth wooden cane. Her car, according to the citation, was a beige 2003 Buick LeSabre with 128,000 miles, ticketed at 9:12 a.m. on October 18, 2025, in a commercial loading zone outside 241 Atwells Avenue on Federal Hill. Fine amount, $85. Judge Caprio looked down over his glasses. "Good morning, ma'am." Eleanor didn't smile. "Morning." The room gave her a second look, not because she was 92, because she sounded like she had no intention of asking anyone for help. Maria read from the citation. Violation code 1248. Parked in a posted commercial loading zone between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Vehicle unattended for 19 minutes. The city parking officer who wrote the ticket was present that day. Daniel Ruiz, 36 years old, dark blue municipal jacket zipped to the neck, trim beard, close-cropped hair. The kind of posture that said he took being fair personally. He stood near the side rail with his citation book tucked under his arm. Judge Caprio glanced at Eleanor. "Do you want to explain what happened?" She nodded once. "I can." Her voice had gravel in it, not the weak kind. The kind earned over decades. "Go ahead," the judge said. Eleanor adjusted her grip on the cane. "I parked there on purpose." That pulled the room upright. Not because of the admission. People admitted parking violations all the time. It was the way she said it, flat, certain, almost defiant. Officer Ruiz lifted his eyebrows as if to say, "Well, that settles it." But Eleanor wasn't finished. "And the ticket is fair," she added. "What isn't fair is that I should have done what I went there to do 68 years earlier." A low whisper moved across the benches like wind brushing dry leaves. Share this with someone who needs to see how fast an ordinary day can change, because that one sentence stopped the courtroom colder than any gavel ever could. Judge Caprio leaned forward. He had heard thousands of people talk in court. He knew the difference between an excuse and a burden. "Mrs. Mercer," he said carefully, "what do you mean by that?" For the first time, Eleanor looked less like a woman fighting a ticket and more like someone deciding whether to open a locked room inside herself. She glanced toward the back of the courtroom. A younger woman sat there, maybe in her 40s, with chestnut hair twisted into a loose bun and hospital scrubs under a black puffer coat. She looked exhausted in the way only working nurses and worried family members look exhausted. That was Claire Mercer, Eleanor's granddaughter, an oncology nurse at Rhode Island Hospital. She gave the smile. Less shake of her head, like she wanted her grandmother to stop. Eleanor ignored it. "What I mean, Your Honor," she said, "is that I wasn't late to a lunch date. I wasn't shopping. I wasn't lazy. I parked in that loading zone because I was carrying a confession to a man whose father my husband ruined in 1957. The sound in the room vanished. Not quiet vanished. Even the clerk stopped typing. Officer Ruiz straightened, confused now. He looked from Eleanor to the judge and back again. Judge Caprio didn't rush. He never rushed when the truth might be trying to arrive. "Take your time," he said. But Eleanor wasn't a woman built for taking her time with pain. She was built for surviving it. "My husband, Vincent Mercer, died on April 3rd of last year," she said. "Heart failure. Kent County Hospital. He waited until his last good hour to tell me the thing he should have told the police in Eisenhower's America. On November 19th, 1957, after a Union Christmas party came early and too wet, he was driving a borrowed Ford Fairlane down Dean Street. He'd been drinking. He clipped a florist's delivery truck at the corner of Atwell's and Sutton. The truck spun, hit a hydrant, and the driver was trapped. A man in the back actually whispered, 'My God.' Eleanor kept going. My husband drove away. No one moved. No cough, no paper rustle, no shifting feet. Just the raw, humming shock of strangers realizing a parking ticket had become a witness stand for a ghost. Judge Caprio looked at Maria DeLuca. She was frozen with her fingers above the keyboard. "Keep the record open," he said softly. Then he turned back to Eleanor. "Do you know the name of the driver?" "I do now," she said. "Anthony Greco, 29 years old, married, one little boy, crushed left tibia, broken right wrist, 3 cracked ribs. His flower delivery business collapsed 6 months later because he couldn't work like he used to. His wife went nights at Miriam Hospital Laundry to keep them afloat. Their son gave up college to help with the shop." Now Claire Mercer was staring at the floor. Her jaw tightened so hard it shook. Officer Ruiz shifted uncomfortably. This was not what he had shown up for. Judge Caprio asked, "How do you know all this?" Eleanor opened her handbag, slowly, deliberately. She removed a bundle of papers bound in a red ribbon and set them on the ledge in front of her. On top was a yellowed police report copy, edges brittle with age. Beneath it sat a hand-written letter on lined stationery. Beneath that, several photocopied medical pages, a bank envelope, and what looked like old black and white photographs. "Because after Vincent told me," she said, "I spent 14 months learning what silence costs. If anyone had clipped the next 10 seconds and posted them online, it would have exploded before lunch." Judge Caprio's face changed. Not pity, not disbelief, recognition. The kind that comes when a story stops being about law and starts being about conscience. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "before we go any further, is there someone else connected to this matter who knows you're here today?" Eleanor swallowed. "Yes." "Who?" "Thomas Greco." The room breathed in at once. "The driver's son," she said. "He's 74 now, runs Greco and Son Florist on Federal Hill. I called him after I found him, wrote him first, twice. He never answered. Then I went there with the box." She nodded toward the citation. "The day I got that ticket." Judge Caprio looked to Officer Ruiz. "That was the date of the violation." Yes, Your Honor, Ruiz said. October 18th, 9:12 in the morning. What happened when you approached the vehicle? Ruiz hesitated. I can explain. Please do. The officer took a breath. The Buick was in a clearly posted commercial loading zone, engine off, no driver visible, standard ticket. As I was finalizing it, I observed Mrs. Mercer exiting Greco and Son carrying what looked like a cedar box. She appeared emotional but steady. I handed her the citation. She said. He stopped, embarrassed now. Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow. She said what? Ruiz glanced at Eleanor, then answered. She said, write what you have to write, officer. I'm already 68 years late. That line hit the room like a dropped glass. Like this video, if you've ever heard a sentence so simple and so heavy you knew it would stay with you. Because everyone in that courtroom knew they had just stepped into the kind of moment that doesn't end when the hearing does. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Mrs. Mercer, did you bring those papers to give to Mr. Greco? I did. What was in the box? Vincent's confession letter. The police report I found in city archives. $40,000 from the sale of my house in Warwick, and the wedding band he wore the night he ran. The gallery reacted. Audible now, a gasp here, a whisper there. $40,000. A ring. A confession. All tied to an $85 parking ticket. Judge Caprio looked too. The back bench. Miss Mercer, would you step forward, please? Claire stood slowly and approached. Her hospital ID badge swung from a blue lanyard. Claire Mercer, RN. You're her granddaughter? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. Did you know about this? Claire pressed trembling fingers to her mouth before answering. Not all of it. I knew my grandfather said something before he died. I knew Nana had become obsessed with old records, old newspapers, phone calls. I didn't know she was bringing money. I didn't know about the ring. Eleanor cut in, sharp again, because you wanted me to let it die. Claire turned, hurt flaring up at once. I wanted you to stop driving into Providence alone in the rain with your blood pressure through the roof, Nana. There it is, Eleanor said. Always blood pressure with you people. Nobody asks about blood guilt. That got a reaction, a few stunned looks. Even Maria DeLuca blinked. Judge Caprio held up a calming hand. Let's slow down. But the morning had already shifted gears. Nobody in that room wanted slow anymore. They wanted the rest. And then Judge Caprio asked the question that changed everything again. Mrs. Mercer, he said, did Thomas Greco agree to meet you that morning? Eleanor closed her eyes. No, she said, he told me not to come. The courtroom went silent all over again. Now it wasn't just a confession. Now it was a trespass into old pain. Officer Ruiz looked surprised. Claire looked horrified. Judge Caprio's voice stayed steady. Then why did you go? Eleanor opened her eyes and said, because his father deserved the truth even if his son hated the messenger. And that was the moment people on those wooden benches would talk about for years, because the hearing was no longer about whether she'd parked where she shouldn't have. It was about whether late truth can still do good when it arrives where it was never invited. What nobody in that room knew yet was that Thomas Greco wasn't the only person Eleanor had tried to reach. There was another letter, another witness, and a piece of video footage from inside that flower shop that would make Officer Ruiz lower his head and force Claire to understand why her grandmother had risked everything for one impossible morning. But none of them had seen it yet. Judge Caprio looked at the papers in front of him, then at the woman who had walked in looking like a stubborn old driver and was now standing there like the last keeper of a terrible promise. Mrs. Mercer, he said, I think we need to understand the whole story. And Eleanor nodded once. Then hear it all, she said. The room leaned in, because everyone knew the next words would either break her or finally free her. Eleanor rested both hands on the cane before she spoke again. The pearl brooch on her coat caught the courtroom lights. If you didn't know what was happening, she looked like somebody's grandmother waiting at church. But if you listened closely, you could hear the strain in her breathing. Not fear. Not exactly. It sounded more like a woman forcing herself to climb stairs she had avoided for most of her life. I met Vincent Mercer in the summer of 1954, she said. Narragansett Shore. I was 21, working alterations at a department store in Providence. He was handsome in the reckless way handsome men used to get away with. Slick black hair. White t-shirt folded at the sleeves. Smiled with one side of his mouth like he knew trouble would always forgive him. A faint, sad laugh came from somewhere in the gallery. The judge didn't interrupt. He was funny, Eleanor continued. He danced. He could make a room feel warmer. That's the dangerous kind, the kind you mistake for safe. Claire lowered her eyes. She had likely heard pieces of this over the years, but not like this. Not stripped down in public. We married at St. Mary's in Cranston in 1956. I wore satin. He cried when I came down the aisle, real tears. He wasn't a monster, Your Honor. I need that on the record. He was weak when it mattered most. There's a difference. That line landed hard. Maria DeLuca typed it without looking up. He worked sanitation. Long hours, strong shoulders, loved Sinatra, hated dentists, thought apologies were for men who planned to lose. In 1957, the city had a holiday party for the Union men. Cheap whiskey, loud laughter, the old foolish pride of men daring each other not to look afraid. Vincent borrowed his cousin's Ford Fairlane because our Plymouth was in the garage. He should not have been driving. He knew it. He told me later he almost turned back twice. Did he come home that night? Judge Caprio asked. He did, Eleanor said, just after midnight. Shirt damp from rain, face gray, not guilty gray, terrified gray. I asked what happened. He said he hit a hydrant avoiding a truck. That was his first lie. The next morning, the Providence Journal had a little article on page 9. Florist injured in overnight crash. Driver sought. Vincent read it at tea. He kitchen table, folded the paper and said nothing. The whole room stayed with her. He followed the story, though, quietly. That's how guilt works in cowards. It doesn't make them brave, it makes them curious. He learned the driver's name, Anthony Greco. He learned the man survived, learned he walked with a limp, learned the police didn't find the other driver. Every time there was a mention in the paper, Vincent clipped it and hid it in his toolbox. Judge Caprio asked, "Did you know any of this at the time?" "No," Eleanor said. "Not the truth, just the weather around it. He became short-tempered, stopped driving after dark for years, couldn't pass a flower truck without going quiet. On our 10th anniversary, I asked why he hated red carnations. He left the table. That image hovered in the air, a marriage shaped by something never named. He carried it until the end," she said. "Last year when he was dying, the morphine had worn off and he was clear, clearer than he'd been in 20 years. He grabbed my wrist with what strength he had left and said, 'Ellie, there's a man I left in the street.' I thought fever was talking. Then he told me the whole thing, the corner, the drink, the truck, the sound of metal. He said he saw the driver move. He said he heard somebody yell from a second-floor window. He panicked and drove." Claire's shoulders shook once. "What did he ask you to do?" Judge Caprio asked. Eleanor's voice thinned. "He said, 'Find them if you can. Tell them I knew every day what I did.' Then he cried harder than he cried at our wedding." The gallery sat in a silence that had become almost physical. Officer Ruiz looked down at the floor. "And you decided to carry that out?" the judge asked. "I decided," Eleanor said, "that if a man can die with the truth in his mouth, the woman who spent 68 years sleeping beside him does not get to choose comfort over conscience." That was another line people would have quoted for weeks. Drop a comment telling us if you think most people would have had the courage to do what Eleanor did, because right there, the whole room was wrestling with the same question. Judge Caprio asked Maria to mark the documents as exhibits for identification. Then he looked back at Eleanor. "How did you find the Greco family?" The old woman gave a tired little shrug. Bad knees and stubbornness. That finally drew a small smile from the judge. Then she laid it out. She started with Providence Archives, a retired records clerk named Peter Salvo, who still came in part-time on Tuesdays wearing suspenders and carrying butter cookies in a tin. She told him she was looking for an accident report from 1957. He told her half the city came in looking for things they should have asked about when people were alive. Then he helped her anyway. He found report number 5711204, single vehicle collision secondary to sideswipe by unknown operator. Victim, Anthony Greco, owner-operator Greco Floral Delivery. Witness statement mentioned a light-colored sedan leaving westbound. No plate obtained. No arrest. Case closed unsolved. Then Eleanor searched old business listings. Greco Floral Delivery became Greco and Son in 1968, then Greco and Son Florist in 1979. Different addresses. Same family line. She wrote letters to the Atwells Avenue address and to a Warwick Post Office box attached to the business. No answer. I almost stopped, she admitted. Then Peter Salvo called me on a Wednesday and said, "Mrs. Mercer, if you're still trying to be haunted, I found the wife's obituary." There were no laughs at that, only the ache of how true it sounded. Rosa Greco died in 2011, Eleanor continued. The obituary named their son Thomas, grandchildren too, enough for me to know I was knocking on a door built from the same wreck. Judge Caprio asked, "Did you contact him after that?" "I did, 3 letters, 1 certified, no response. Then 1 voicemail from a number I found through his granddaughter's wedding florist page." Claire shut her eyes. She knew where this was headed. "What did the voicemail say?" the judge asked. Eleanor took a breath and repeated it from memory. "Mrs. Mercer, I don't know what story you're trying to tell, but my father has been dead 8 years. If this is about money, shame on you. If it's about guilt, keep it. Do not come to the shop." The judge let that sit. "And you went anyway?" "I went anyway." "Why?" "Because in my age," Eleanor said, "you start hearing the clock in places other people don't. On the stairs, in the sink, in the middle of the night. I had spent a year building up the nerve to do what my husband should have done in 1 honest hour. I was not going to let a voicemail bury it." Officer Ruiz cleared his throat. "Your Honor." "Yes, officer. I'd like to add something." "Go ahead." Ruiz shifted, suddenly less like a city officer and more like an ordinary man trying to place his own role in something much bigger than a citation. "When I wrote the ticket, I didn't know any of this, obviously, but there is surveillance from the storefront across the street, Tony's Market. Their owner flagged me down later because he said the woman on the ticket looked distressed. I reviewed a clip. She wasn't shopping. She went in carrying the box, came out without it, sat in her car for a full minute before starting it. She was crying." Claire turned sharply toward Eleanor. "You never told me you got inside." Eleanor didn't look at her. "You never asked the right question." That line cut. Judge Caprio asked Ruiz, "Do we have access to the video?" "I can get it," Ruiz said. "Owner emailed it to the city appeals office after the citation was filed." "Please do." Ruiz nodded and moved to speak quietly with a court staff member near the side door. Now there was evidence, not just confession, footage. And the air changed again. Because stories can stir people, evidence pins them down. Judge Caprio turned back to Eleanor. "You said you brought $40,000. Why that amount?" Eleanor pulled a folded yellow legal pad page from her bag. Columns of numbers in careful blue ink ran down the page. "I worked backward from what I could document," she said. "Medical expenses after insurance. Lost reported business income from 1958 and 1959 based on tax notices Peter found. Inflation estimates done by my neighbor's grandson, who teaches accounting at URI. It should probably be more. It is all I could make liquid without leaving my granddaughter with my debts." Claire inhaled sharply. "You sold the house." Eleanor finally turned to her. "Yes. Nana. I rented the apartment on Elmwood in September." Claire looked like somebody had hit her. "You told me you wanted less yard work." "That too." This was no longer just one old secret. It was sacrifice. Housing, money, legacy, family trust. It layered the hurt deeper. Judge Caprio asked quietly, "Did Vincent ask you to pay restitution?" "No," Eleanor said. "He only asked me to tell them. The money was my decision. I lived in the shelter of a lie too, not knowingly at first. But once he told me, every dollar in that house felt louder." That line left people staring at her hands. Hands knotted with age spots and blue veins. Hands that had sewn dresses, packed lunches, buried a husband, and now were trying to put a price on decades of silence. Then the side door opened, and Officer Ruiz returned with a USB drive and a paper file. "Your Honor," he said, "City Appeals has the footage and also my written supplement. There's one more thing." Judge Caprio looked up. "What?" Ruiz held the paper file tighter. "Greco and Son sent in a letter when they got notice of this hearing. That hit everyone at once." Claire looked toward the file. Eleanor went still. Judge Caprio extended his hand. "May I see it?" Ruiz walked it up. Maria DeLuca took it first, marked it, and handed it to the judge. The courtroom was so quiet now that you could hear rain tapping the high window near the ceiling. Judge Caprio opened the letter. He read the first line silently, then his eyes lifted to Eleanor. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "Thomas Greco knew you would be here today." Eleanor blinked hard. "He did. He wrote this 3 days ago." Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Maria stopped typing again. The judge lowered the page slightly. "Would you like me to read it into the record?" For the first time since she walked in, Eleanor Mercer looked afraid. But she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. And what Judge Caprio read next would turn the case from confession into confrontation, because Thomas Greco's letter did not begin with anger. It began with a sentence nobody expected. It said, "If Eleanor Mercer finally tells the truth in open court, then I intend for mine to be heard too." The room didn't just lean in now. It braced. Because buried in that envelope was a second version of the past, and if Thomas Greco was willing to put it on the record, then whatever happened in that flower shop on Atwell's Avenue had not ended the way anyone assumed. Judge Caprio adjusted the paper in his hand and began to read. "Your Honor, my name is Thomas Anthony Greco, son of Anthony Greco, the man injured in the November 19, 1957 collision referenced by Mrs. Mercer. I am unable to attend the first portion of the hearing because of a medical appointment with my wife, but I intend to arrive if timing allows. If Mrs. Mercer appears, please know that I have met her already. She came to my shop on October 18 despite my request that she stay away. I was angry when she walked in. I am not proud of how I spoke to her, but before judgment is passed on her or on me, the whole story should be known." The judge paused. A whisper moved across the room. So she had made it inside. She had met him. Something happened. Eleanor's shoulders dropped a fraction, as though a weight she'd been holding in her jaw had shifted to her chest. Judge Caprio continued. "My father was not only injured in that crash, he was altered by it. The steel rack from the delivery truck pinned his left leg. He walked with a cane after that. He never regained full strength in his hand. He lost contracts with 3 hotels because he could no longer deliver as quickly, and by 1960, my mother was taking buses to night work with swollen feet. I know exactly what that unknown driver stole from my family. I watched my father wince every winter until he died." Nobody in the room moved. Even the rain outside sounded quieter now. "But that is not the entire truth," the judge read. There it was, the twist. Officer Ruiz looked up sharply. Claire frowned. Maria's fingers hovered above the keyboard, waiting. Judge Caprio kept reading. In 1988, after my mother's second stroke, my father gave me a sealed envelope and told me to open it only after his death. I did not open it until 2018, a year after we buried him. Inside was a witness note he had kept hidden for decades. The note came from a woman named Agnes Sirely, who lived above the corner store near the crash site in 1957. She wrote that she saw the other driver stop half a block away, get out in the rain, look back toward the truck, then drive off. She believed the man wanted to return but panicked because he was drunk. A man near the rear bench muttered, "Wow." The judge read on. My father underlined one sentence in her note. It said, "The driver looked young enough to ruin his whole life in 1 minute." Now the room was holding two pains at once: the Greco's suffering, Vincent Mercer's cowardice, and Anthony Greco's private recognition that the person who fled may have been more broken than evil. Judge Caprio kept going. My father wrote in the margin of that note, "If he ever comes back, I want the truth, not revenge." Claire stared at Eleanor, stunned. Eleanor looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. Judge Caprio lowered the letter halfway. "Mrs. Mercer, did you know any of this?" "No," she said. "No, he never told me." The judge nodded and resumed. "When Mrs. Mercer entered my shop, she was carrying a cedar box with both hands and breathing hard. She said, 'Mr. Greco, I'm here because my husband failed your father, and I failed to force the truth out of him.' I told her I didn't need a performance from a stranger. Then she put the box on the design counter next to a bucket of white roses and said something I can still hear. She said, 'I'm not here to ask you to absolve a dead man. I'm here to stop benefiting from him.'" That hit Claire hardest. You could see it. Her face crumpled like she was only now understanding the scale of what her grandmother had chosen. Eleanor stared at the rail in front of her. She looked smaller now, not in spirit but in self-protection, like the steel in her had finally begun to show the dents. Judge Caprio finished the next paragraph. "I opened the box. Inside was the confession letter, copies of old city records, a cashier's check, and Vincent Mercer's wedding ring. I was angry. Then I saw Mrs. Mercer's hands shaking, truly shaking, not from age, from terror. I realized she had not come to clear her own conscience with a speech. She had come to surrender comfort." Nobody breathed too loudly. The judge turned the page. "I told her I could not decide anything on the spot. I told her to take the money back until I spoke with my children. She refused. She said, 'If I leave here with it, I may become a coward before lunch.' I laughed despite myself. Then I told her the city would ticket her outside, and she said, 'Then I'll be judged in 2 places the same morning.'" Even Judge Caprio smiled at that one, though sadly. The gallery gave a tiny murmur of disbelief. Judge Caprio continued. "I kept the box. I did not cash the check. I did not call her back. I needed time. Then notice of this hearing came. My wife, Lorraine, told me if a woman makes it to 92 carrying a secret she didn't create but still chooses to carry to your door, the least you can do is show up long enough to look her in the eye. I intend to do that." The judge set the letter down. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. This silence was full of rearranging hearts. Officer Ruiz exhaled slowly. Maria De Luca wiped under one eye before she remembered she was on the record. Claire Mercer turned toward her grandmother, and all the frustration that had been building in her seemed to war with something much softer. "You sold your house for this," Claire whispered. Eleanor's answer came without drama. "For this, and because I was tired of walking through rooms bought partly by somebody else's limp." That sentence broke whatever distance remained between the story and the room. A woman in the gallery actually covered her face. Hit that subscribe button if you believe some courtroom moments feel bigger than court. Because What came next was the kind of exchange that reminds people why truth has weight. Judge Caprio folded the Greco letter carefully. "Mrs. Mercer, why didn't you tell your granddaughter everything?" Eleanor looked at Claire, then away. "Because I knew she would try to save me from the consequences." Claire answered before the judge could. "Because I love you." "I know," Eleanor said, "and love is always trying to keep old women in safe chairs." That got a faint laugh. Necessary, human, a small release. Then Claire said, her voice trembling, "Do you understand what this did to me? Watching you disappear into city offices, checking your blood pressure 3 times a day, wondering if dementia was making you chase newspaper ghosts." "Claire," Eleanor said quietly, "I remember every ghost by name." That was the moment of realization, not for Eleanor, for Claire, for Officer Ruiz, for everyone who had initially filed this under stubborn old woman. The arrogance people thought they saw was not entitlement, it was discipline, the brittle shell around a mission she believed she might die before finishing. Judge Caprio leaned back. "I would like to view the surveillance footage from October 18th. A clerk dimmed one bank of lights. The old monitor on the side wall flickered alive. Grainy black and white video appeared from Tony's Market, timestamped 9:06:14 a.m. There was the beige Buick in the loading zone, rain spotting the windshield, wipers still for a moment, then off. Eleanor emerged from the driver's side slowly, lifting a cedar box from the passenger seat. She almost lost her balance on the curb, then steadied herself with the cane. Officer Ruiz appeared in frame 2 minutes later, walking past the Buick, checking signage, writing. The footage had no sound, but you didn't need it. At 9:10, Eleanor entered Greco and Son. At 9:27, the door opened again. She came out lighter, no box in her hands. Her shoulders were slumped. Ruiz stepped forward and handed her the citation. She looked at it, then she said something. Officer Ruiz, watching the screen with everyone else, spoke softly into the silence. That's when she said, "I'm already 68 years late." On screen, Eleanor took the ticket, tucked it into her coat pocket, and stood motionless for several seconds in the rain. Then she put one hand over her mouth and turned away before getting into the car. No one in the courtroom would ever see that footage as just evidence of a parking violation. It was the visual of a lifetime of moral weight crossing a wet sidewalk. Judge Caprio let the clip end before speaking. "Officer Ruiz, did you note anything else at the scene?" Ruiz nodded. "I did, Your Honor. At first I thought she was another person assuming age excuses rules. I was wrong. After I issued the ticket, I asked if she needed assistance getting to the car. She told me no. Then she asked me something strange. She said, 'Officer, if a person is late telling the truth, do you write that down anywhere?' I didn't know what she meant. I just told her to appeal the citation if she wanted." A soft murmur traveled across the benches. Judge Caprio said, "Thank you for your honesty." Ruiz swallowed and nodded. The officer's confidence was gone now, replaced by that very human discomfort that comes when you realize you were reading the wrong story off the cover. Then the courtroom door opened again. Everyone turned. A man in a dark green rain jacket stood just inside with a folded umbrella dripping onto the tile. He was tall but stooped at the shoulders in the way men get when years of lifting and grieving settle into bone. Silver hair, strong jaw, a florist's hands, broad fingers, nicked knuckles, clean but stained faintly by soil and stem work. Beside him stood a woman with warm eyes and a knitted maroon scarf, likely his wife. This was Thomas Greco and Lorraine Greco. No one had to announce it. The room felt it instantly. Maria DeLuca rose halfway. "Mr. Greco." He nodded. "Sorry I'm late. Oncology ran long." Claire turned instinctively toward Lorraine's scarf, then toward Thomas, understanding all at once that his wife's medical appointment was not some abstract inconvenience. It was one more place life had made room for pain while this old story waited its turn. Judge Caprio gestured gently. Mr. Greco, please come forward if you're able. Thomas walked down the aisle slowly, not hesitant, deliberate. Lorraine stayed one step behind, one hand resting lightly at his elbow. Eleanor Mercer did not turn fully to face him. She seemed unable to, her eyes fixed on the floor near the rail. Thomas reached the front and stood opposite her. For a moment, the courtroom held two families separated by a crash that happened before many people in the room were even born. Judge Caprio spoke first. "Mr. Greco, thank you for coming." Thomas gave a small nod. "I wasn't going to miss this. Would you like to say something?" Thomas looked at Eleanor. "I would." The judge leaned back and let him have the room. Thomas cleared his throat. "When this woman first called my shop, I thought it was a scam. Then she sent the letters, I still thought. Maybe it was confusion, maybe guilt mixed with old age. Then she showed up in person, and I was angry, not theatrical angry, tired angry. The kind where you've watched your father button a shirt with a bad hand for 40 years and you don't know where to put that memory." Eleanor's head lowered further. Thomas continued. "I told her she had no right to walk into my business and reopen my father's pain. She said, 'You're right.' I told her that made it worse. She said, 'I know.' I asked why now. Why after all this time? She told me because he finally ran out of tomorrows and I'm close enough to count mine." There was the line again. The room tightened around it. Thomas looked toward Judge Caprio. "I didn't forgive her that day. I want that clear. I didn't even know if forgiveness was mine to give. But when she put that ring on my counter and said she no longer wanted to wear comfort that belonged to someone else's suffering, I believed she meant every word." Lorraine Greco squeezed his elbow. Then Thomas turned fully to Eleanor. "Mrs. Mercer." She looked up at last. He went on, "Do you know what I asked my father most as a kid?" Her lips parted, but no words came. "I asked if he ever wanted the man found." Eleanor shook her head faintly. "He always said the same thing. Found is not the same as changed. I never understood that when I was young. I thought justice meant catching, punishing, making the scales look even. But after my father died and after I read Agnes Sirley's note, I understood what he meant. He wanted the driver to become the kind of man who wouldn't leave someone in the street. He didn't think that would happen in a jail cell alone." Now the room was fully inside the moral complexity. Not cheap anger, not simple absolution, something harder, better. Eleanor's mouth trembled. "I'm sorry," she said. It was the first time she had said the words plainly. Not in a letter, not as a moral argument, not wrapped in history. Just, "I'm sorry." And if you've ever waited years to hear an apology, real or imagined, then you know how much can live inside two words. Thomas heard them, everybody did. But he didn't rush to comfort her. He asked, "Are you sorry because Vincent died with it, or because my father lived with it?" Eleanor took that hit. She deserved it and she knew it. "For both," she said, "but if I'm honest, the second took me too long." That honesty mattered more than performance ever could. Judge Caprio watched closely. So did everyone else. Nobody wanted sentimentality now. They wanted truth sturdy enough to stand. Thomas nodded slowly. "That is the first completely useful sentence I've heard in this story." A few people in the gallery exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for miles. Then Lorraine Greco spoke, softly but firmly. "Tom." He looked at her. She said, "Tell her the rest." The room shifted again. There was more. There always is. Thomas looked back at Eleanor. "After you left my shop, I opened the letter from your husband. Then I opened my father's envelope again. There was another page tucked behind Agnes Sirley's note. A page I either missed in 2018 or wasn't ready to read then." Judge Caprio leaned forward. Claire did too. Officer Ruiz frowned. Maria's fingers hovered. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded page protected in clear plastic. My father wrote it in 1992, he said. He had just had his second hip surgery. His handwriting was worse by then. He addressed it to whoever finally comes back. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. Thomas unfolded the page. If the woman or the man connected to the car comes to you after I'm gone, he read, listen before you decide. Pain makes people think revenge is a full meal. It is. It's salt water, it keeps you thirsty. If they lie, send them out. If they cry for themselves only, send them out. But if they come carrying the truth without bargaining for comfort, let them leave lighter than they arrived. I lost strength in that crash. I do not want my son to lose softness. Nobody in that room was ready for how hard that would hit. A woman in the back whispered, "Oh, my Lord." Claire openly cried now. Quiet tears, nurse tears, the kind trained to wait until a moment earns them. Eleanor looked shattered, not dramatically, more devastatingly than that, like an old structure finally giving way where the crack had always been. Thomas lowered the page. That's why I came today, not because the ticket matters, because my father gave me instructions, and I think this is the day I'm supposed to follow them. Hit that subscribe button if you believe forgiveness is hardest when it costs you something. Because everyone in that room understood they were witnessing a moment most families never get. Judge Caprio let the silence sit. He knew not to step on a truth like that. Then he asked the one question nobody else had the steadiness to ask. "Mr. Greco," he said, "have you decided what to do with the money?" Thomas nodded yes. Eleanor looked at him like she could barely survive the answer. "I'm not keeping it for myself," he said. "Not as personal payment. My father would hate that. But I'm not sending it back either. Lorraine and I have talked. My granddaughter Elena is in physical therapy school at URI. We want to use the money to create a small treatment fund at St. Joseph Rehabilitation for uninsured patients recovering from leg injuries after traffic trauma. In my father's name." And in one line in small print, maybe we add this. Truth arrived late, but it still walked in. That broke the room. Actual sobs now, soft ones, surprised ones, hands over mouths, heads bowed. Even Officer Ruiz blinked hard and looked away. Eleanor put both hands over her face. Judge Caprio's voice came low and full. "That is extraordinary." Thomas turned to her again. "But before any of that happens, I need to say one more thing." Eleanor lowered her hands, red-eyed. "My father told me once that the worst part of being hit wasn't the crash. It was not knowing whether the driver ever thought about him again. Today I know the answer. He was thought about. For 68 years he was thought about. That doesn't erase anything, but it matters." Eleanor gave one trembling nod after another. "Every winter," she whispered, "every flower truck, every red carnation. He never escaped it, and neither did I once I knew." Thomas held her gaze. "Then hear this clearly. I do not forgive what Vincent did. That belongs to history and to God. But I forgive you for bringing me the truth in the way you did." The whole room inhaled together. There it was. The mercy moment. Not soft, not naive, not denial. Real forgiveness, boundaried, adult, earned. Lorraine Greco stepped forward then, breaking protocol by just enough to make the scene feel human, and touched Eleanor lightly on the forearm. "She's been carrying this alone," Lorraine said. "Nobody carries anything alone well at 92. Claire let out a strangled laugh through tears. "Tell me about it." A ripple of relieved laughter moved through the courtroom. Necessary again. Life returning in small doses. Judge Caprio straightened in his chair, his expression both tender and formal. "I've sat on this bench a long time," he said, "and I want to say something for the record. The law can mark where a car was parked. It can assign a fine. It can name a violation. But the best use of a courtroom is not just to punish wrong. It is to recognize when truth, accountability, and mercy have done work that punishment alone never could." Maria typed every word. Somebody in the gallery whispered, "That's a quote." It was. Judge Caprio continued. Mrs. Mercer, you knowingly parked in a commercial loading zone. On the facts of the citation, the violation occurred. But I am also looking at a 92-year-old woman who used that illegal parking space not for convenience, not for arrogance, not to gain an advantage, but to do something morally necessary that she believed time no longer allowed her to postpone. He paused, eyes on her. Most people spend their lives avoiding the hardest right thing. You drove straight toward yours. Eleanor cried more openly now, not dainty tears, deep ones, the kind that seemed to come from behind the lungs. Then Judge Caprio said the line that would have gone viral in a heartbeat if 1 million people had watched it live. Mercy is not the opposite of justice, he said. Mercy is what makes justice worth remembering. The room erupted. Not chaos, not applause exactly because people in court know better, but a full-body release, gasps, murmurs, tears, heads shaking, that electric collective feeling when everyone knows they just heard something true enough to outlive the moment. Judge Caprio raised a hand gently, settling the room. As to the citation, he said, I am dismissing it in the interest of justice. Officer Ruiz nodded immediately. No objection. But that wasn't the climax, not really. The climax came when Eleanor Mercer, dismissed from the ticket she had admitted was fair, did not step away from the rail. She stayed. Judge Caprio noticed, Mrs. Mercer. She looked at Thomas Greco. There's one more thing, she said. Of course there was. At this point, even the rain seemed to lean closer to the windows. Thomas looked wary but willing. What is it? Eleanor reached into her handbag again. This time she pulled out a small velvet pouch, midnight blue and worn thin at the seams. I didn't put this in the cedar box, she said, because I was ashamed. Thomas frowned slightly. She loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. A bent silver St. Christopher medal and a tiny brass florist's pin with a hand-painted violet on it. Thomas stared. Lorraine touched his sleeve. Tom. Eleanor's voice shook. Vincent kept these in the back of his toolbox. He took them from the street that night. A sound went through the room like a blade of cold air. There it was, the confrontation around the deepest wound. Not just fleeing, taking, keeping. Thomas's face hardened. Decades seemed to gather there at once. My father wore that medal every day, he said, almost too quietly to hear. And the pin belonged to my mother. She gave it to him for luck. Eleanor nodded, crying harder. He told me that before he died. Said he picked them up after the crash because he panicked and wanted proof it had happened, then hated himself too much to throw them away. I should have brought them to your shop. I couldn't. I thought if I did, you'd see what kind of man I married and shut the door before I finished the first sentence. Thomas didn't answer. The room was frozen again. Because forgiveness for silence is one thing. Forgiveness in the face of a relic of the original wrong is another. Claire whispered, Nana. Judge Caprio said nothing. Wise men know some truths must stand naked for a second before anyone covers them with words. Thomas extended his hand. Slowly. Eleanor stared at it as though she didn't trust what she was seeing. May I? He asked. She placed the medal and pin in his palm. His fingers closed around them. He looked down. The silver was worn smooth in places. The brass pin had a darkened scrape across one edge. And then Thomas Greco broke. Not loudly, not theatrically. His lower lip trembled once, his shoulders pulled inward, and his head bowed over those tiny objects like they had just delivered his father back to him in the smallest, cruelest, most intimate form. Lorraine wrapped an arm around him. The courtroom was beyond silence now. It had entered reverence. Thomas inhaled, shaky. He looked for these for years, he said. My mother said he came home from the hospital asking for them before he asked for pain medicine. Eleanor made a wounded sound in her throat. I know. How could you know that? Because Vincent asked around, quietly. He wanted to know what happened after. He didn't just hide Mr. Greco, he haunted, and he wrote things down. She pulled out one last folded sheet. A list of what your father asked for in the emergency room, the medal, the pin, his wedding picture from the glove box. Vincent learned all of it through a cousin who knew a nurse. He kept the list. Thomas took that in with visible effort. A man can be guilty and miserable without being brave, Eleanor said. That was Vincent. Judge Caprio's eyes stayed fixed on the exchange. This was no longer a ticket hearing. It was moral surgery. Thomas nodded slowly, still looking at the medal and pin. I'm glad you brought them. Eleanor blinked. You are. Yes, he said, because now I know exactly what my father lost and exactly what you returned. People talk about closure like it arrives all at once. Sometimes it comes in metal small enough to fit in your hand. That line hit almost as hard as the rest. Share this with someone who believes small things can carry a whole lifetime, because that tiny medal and pin changed the courtroom more than any stack of paperwork could. Judge Caprio cleared his throat gently. Mr. Greco, Mrs. Mercer, I want to say something else while we have this moment. Accountability without humiliation is rare. Forgiveness without forgetting is rarer. You are both doing difficult work in public today. That deserves respect. Maria typed through tears now. Nobody pretended otherwise. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. Thomas looked at Claire. You're the granddaughter, right? Claire nodded, wiping her face. Yes. You're the nurse. Yes. He took a breath. Then you should know why I finally came today. Claire looked confused. So did Eleanor. Thomas said, my wife's oncology appointment wasn't just routine. Lorraine starts radiation next week. I almost didn't come because I thought I should protect my energy, protect hers, protect the little life we have left from old wreckage. But when I told my daughter Elena about your grandmother, she said something that wouldn't let me sleep. Lorraine smiled faintly, already knowing the line. Thomas went on. If you don't go, she said, then one more young person learns that pain gets the last word. Claire closed her eyes. She felt that as a nurse and as a granddaughter all at once. So I came, Thomas said, not for the past, for what the past teaches people still alive. Now the story had shifted one more time. This wasn't only about two old men and a crash. It was about grandchildren, wives in treatment, the moral inheritance families pass down when they choose truth over fear. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. That is profoundly wise. Then he turned to Claire. Miss Mercer, do you want to say anything before I conclude this matter? Claire laughed through tears. I have too much to say. We have a little time, the judge said. She looked at her grandmother first, really looked at her, not as a patient, not as a family problem, as a full, difficult person. When I was 12, Claire said, Nana told me something after. I broke a lamp and lied about it. She said, a lie doesn't just hide what happened, it charges rent. I didn't understand that until today. A few people nodded in the gallery. They understood it perfectly now. Claire kept going. For months I thought she was unraveling. I argued with her, hid her car keys twice, followed her to City Hall once because I thought she might forget why she went there. I kept treating her like fragile glass when she was actually carrying concrete. Eleanor gave a wet, broken laugh at that. Claire turned to Thomas. I'm sorry my family's truth reached yours so late. Thomas nodded with surprising gentleness. Late is not the same as never. Another quote. Another line that would have flown across the internet if someone had clipped it clean. Then Claire looked back at Eleanor. And I'm sorry I thought protecting you mattered more than understanding you. Eleanor's chin trembled. You.